I'm Simone Witcha. I'm the director of the Blanton Museum of Art, and I'm so happy to welcome everybody here this afternoon for our 5th Blanton Live Conversations for Now program here at the museum. When you walk through the Blanton's current exhibition, Spirit and Splendor, El Greco, Velázquez, and the Hispanic Baroque, you see paintings that depict lavish, dramatic clothes and accessories. In the great Velázquez paintings, you see people dressed from head to toe in all black. Why did the fashion trend in Spain of the Golden Age look like that? Was it just very chic? Was it people showing off, maybe power? Was there a new innovation or trend that allowed the fabric to look that way, and that's why it became popular? I hope you've had a chance to see the exhibition and explore the layers of history and creativity and culture in these extraordinary paintings. Curators at art museums have looked at fashion and style to research works of art, providing them with clues and the visitors with new ways to look at works of art. Today, the fashion objects themselves have been placed on equal footing with the historically recognized works of art, those paintings and sculptures, photography. Leading the charge in fashion scholarship and museum exhibitions has undoubtedly been the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute, which has helped to define the art of fashion through groundbreaking thematic and monographic shows. Style icons, fashion designers, and the objects in the collection of the Costume Institute have been the subject of massively popular shows. We are thrilled to have Mellissa Huber with us today in Austin. Mellissa is the Associate Curator of the Costume Institute and a fashion historian specializing in 20th century dress. Thank you to everyone attending here. Your ticket purchase supports the Blanton and impacts the way that we are able to serve our community. Welcome to all of you joining on our live stream. And to our many members here, your ongoing commitment, it powers everything we do, and we're deeply grateful. I'm now excited to welcome to the stage Mellissa Huber, along with Carter Foster, the Blanton's Chief Curator and Deputy Director for Collections, who will be moderating. Carter will introduce Mellissa further and get the conversation started, taking us into her fascinating world this afternoon. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. Okay. Thank you so much for coming, making the trip from New York and braving the air traffic control system. So I'm going to give a brief bio of you. Mellissa Huber specializes in 20th century fashion and is the educational liaison for the Costume Institute. Since joining the department in 2012, she has co-curated the exhibitions Women Dressing Women, 2023, In Pursuit of Fashion, the Sandy Schreier collection, and she's contributed to some of the Met's most visited shows, including Charles James, Beyond Fashion in 2014, Manus Ex Machina, Fashion in an Age of Technology, and Heavenly Bodies, Fashion and the Catholic Imagination. I saw all three. They were amazing shows. Mellissa holds an MA in Visual Culture from New York University, where she currently teaches in costume studies in the graduate program, and a BFA with a minor in art history from the Fashion Institute of Technology. She has contributed to publications about the Sandy Schreier collection, as well as the very prominent Karl Lagerfeld, A Line of Beauty in 2023. So thanks for being here. I will start with the first question. This is a question about changing perceptions about fashion, art, and museums. I feel that there has been a shift in the role of fashion in museums in the last 15 years or so, and wanted to ask if you agree. And I just want to explain. The Costume Institute at the Met has changed the general perception of fashion as an art form for many through an incredible exhibition program. The Met produces more art historical scholarship than just about any museum in the world. And as someone who's been going to the Met regularly since 1990, I was trying to think of when I felt a shift. And it may have been the 2004 exhibition in the French Decorative Arts Gallery's Dangerous Liaisons, which got a lot of press and attention and showed the fashion with the art. Do people in your field agree that there has indeed been a shift in sort of public perception about fashion in museums? And what's your thought about all that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting that you bring up Dangerous Liaisons because for those who aren't familiar with that show, it was an incredible collaboration with our colleagues in the Department of European Decorative Arts and Sculpture. And the exhibition was installed in the French period room gallery spaces and juxtaposed 18th century French fashions with the furniture and objects and essentially placed them in the environment in which they would have been worn. And I think that's really important and something that wasn't happening like so frequently at the Met prior to that moment. So that show did garner a lot of critical acclaim, and I think it really highlights something that we aspire to do with all of our shows at the Costume Institute, which is present these objects within the context in which they were actually created. In terms of the field growing and garnering more recognition and this appreciation for fashion as an art form happening, I think it was definitely happening, I would say, at a sort of increased level throughout the 21st century. I mean, you can look back at prior sort of pivotal shifting moments, and actually one really common one within our field is looking at Cecil Beaton's exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum, an anthology of fashion, which he curated in 1972. And actually that very same year, Diana Vreeland came to the Costume Institute, and she was a special consultant to the department, not technically a curator, but she really understood that fashion was this living art and that it needed to be engaging and feel current and of the moment and like lively to captivate and really connect with modern audiences. So a lot of her design and display techniques are things that I think were really seeded during her tenure and that have sort of shifted over the years, but were really critical. But there have been shows like that have really wide popular appeal, like Hamish Bowles guest curated a show called Jacqueline Kennedy, The White House Years, that was really popular in 2001. But for me, the shifting point was really a show that our curator in charge, Andrew Bolton, curated in 2012 on Alexander McQueen.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah. And the museum knew that it would be a popular show, and McQueen was such a remarkable and highly influential designer. But what no one was prepared for was how popular the show would be. So this was during a moment, Instagram had been introduced in like 2010. So social media existed, but really the show was learned about through word of mouth. Photography still wasn't allowed in the galleries at that point, and lines became a really big thing. And New Yorkers have a very special love-hate relationship with lines. We love and hate our lines, but the act of like waiting in line and that anticipation for the show was something that was really remarkable. And actually my husband and I went to go see it on I was in graduate school and just finishing my degree then. It was the last show before I started at the Met. So I can say, with full humility that it was an extraordinary exhibition and just...
It was,
yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt, yeah.
But I remember waiting in the line and just that feeling of like excitement and anticipation, and also looking around and just being so impressed by just how diverse the audience was too. It was all ages, all genders. I think often fashion is viewed as like this female purview, but there was just so many people from all around the world just so excited to be in the gallery spaces. And the scenography was just extraordinary. McQueen's work is just extraordinary. And it was also very poignant with the designer's recent death. And I just think that it created this perfect storm with just so much excitement and energy around it. And I think seeing that really impressive installation and being so moved by it and feeling that emotional resonance made people really realize what an important art form fashion is and can be.
Was that Andrew Bolton's first show, big show at the Met? No.
It wasn't his first show, and he'd had some very popular shows, but I think that show was like sort of a demarcation line. And for some time at the museum, people would sort of talk about before McQueen and after McQueen.
I can see why, yeah. It was, I mean, everybody was talking about the show. I lived in New York at the time. Everybody was talking about it. And what was interesting to me is that few years before that, he was not a household name. It's not like it wasn't not like Halston or a name, Giorgio Armani, or which the Guggenheim had done a show, or Chanel, or somebody who it's pretty young, on the young side for an artist. And the staging and everything, it was remarkable. You couldn't get in. I mean, it was just like, I've never seen, seemed like, and it was word of mouth. It seemed really interesting.
You had to wait in the epic line with everyone else and make friends. And
I want to have next question is about exhibition design. So the Costume Institute places an extraordinary emphasis on exhibition design. I would even go so far as to say they were at the forefront of it. That's my firm opinion. Most recently, they commissioned the artist Torquazy Dyson to design Superfine Tailoring Black Style, a show that just closed that was also really remarkable. The deservedly celebrated Alexander McQueen retrospective was incredible, and then the Ray Kawakubo show had a glorious architectonic sculptural design. I could go on and on. Clearly, they bring it when they do their shows. I just want to know how the exhibition design process unfolds at the Costume Institute, and how does it support the content of the shows?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing that's very unique about the Costume Institute within the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and there's several things that make us somewhat unique as a curatorial department within that space, is the timeline that we're working under. So we produce a show every year, a big show, and catalog sometimes 2 shows every year. And our team has to work really quickly. Some curatorial departments or curators will talk about working on a project for, maybe 3 to 3, 4 years, on the longer side, even 7 to 10 years. And we usually have 1 to 2 years to pull together a project. So we're working really quickly. I work with an incredibly dedicated, amazing, talented group of peers who are able to pull it off. But that shorter timeline means that a lot of things are happening sort of in tandem, where sometimes the curation might be totally realized. So we have a strong sense of like what objects will be in the show, what the overarching theme is, what the narratives are. But when we start to work on the design, we're still sort of finalizing everything. We may still be waiting on the status of certain loans. And I think that sort of intense, condensed design timeline lends a certain freedom and fluidity to the way that we work. And to that point, we work with a lot of outside creative collaborators who are working on a different timeline, less museum time, like the other departments, and more sort of Costume Institute time. And that has led to really incredible opportunities for collaboration. We've worked with architects, like for the Lagerfeld show, we worked with Tado Ando's team in Japan, which was an amazing experience. We worked with firms like Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro, Rem Koolhaus's architectural firm, OMA. We've also worked with people from film, which is always really interesting too, and they bring a different sort of vantage and lens to the creative process too, which leads to a lot of really interesting conversations. Sometimes fine artists like Torquazy Dyson, as you've mentioned. So that sort of creative synergy and everything sort of coming together at once, I think leads to a lot of like really interesting opportunities to think through the design. And, to that point, design is so important to the way that fashion is understood and represented and, again, contextualized. So we always put a lot of thought and meaning into like, how is something being displayed? What does that say about the object that we're showing the audience? How does it fit into the narrative of this particular show or like moment of exhibition? So it all sort of comes together. But we have an incredible design team at the museum as well, and they're really wonderful partners with our outside creative consultants that come in, and they're always able to really speak to the nuances of the building and the gallery space, the requirements for the safe display of art and fashion, and there's just so much collaboration and so many different people involved in these projects, and everyone brings something really critical to the conversation.
When you work with a living designer like Ray Kawakubo, who's Comme des Garçons, that's the label she's known with, they must have opinions about how the work's going to be shown. How much of is there a push and pull with someone like that? Is it usually an easy collab? I'm sure it's different with every person.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that every project is different, and we have really close relationships with designers in the fashion industry, but curatorial autonomy is really critical to everything that happens at the Met.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a respectful conversation, sharing what's important to realize a project, working together on things, especially for a show like Comme des Garçons, where there's a lot of loans coming from the design house, a lot of information and necessary resources being shared, and also sort of maintaining a certain objective distance so things can be created independently within the museum. But I have to say, and I think that the Comme des Garçons show is a really great example of that. It's such a privilege and pleasure to be able to work with living designers.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
as a 20th century specialist,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people have sadly passed, or there's no longer an opportunity to connect with them. So I always love when we're able to actually chat with a living designer and ask them questions directly, hear their opinions. How would they have done something? And that doesn't go to say that it's their decision, but
Sure.
it's so valuable to hear their input and to be able to learn from that too.
And I would imagine they're thrilled to be having a show at the Met. I mean, you can hardly do better in some
Yeah.
ways. Although not a lot of some people aren't impressed by museums. That's okay too. But one of the great privileges of our work just generally is working with great living artists. I mean, it's a great part of this kind of work for sure.
Absolutely.
Sort of a follow-up question about display, and this is about mannequins in display. And so in the 2017 show Masterworks Unpacking Fashion, the mannequins were headless or even non-existent, with the human form subtly alluded to just by the shape of the garment on display. And in other shows, the mannequins are often white, gray, or even golden. Sometimes the heads include representations of hair carved from the same materials, or the whole head is covered, as seen as in the 2013 show about punk, Chaos Took a Tour. In contrast, 2024 Sleeping Beauties was a show in which dresses seemed to float without bodily reference on a mannequin. Can you tell us more about the role of mannequins in general and how they can be anonymous, disappear to a greater or lesser degree, but also the way they can represent race and gender and become a key element in the storytelling of each exhibition?
Yeah, I mean, mannequins are very tricky, actually. And I think it's something that we don't really think about unless you're actually dressing a garment. And it's interesting because sometimes, even within the Met, we'll loan an object to another department.
Yeah.
And our colleagues will be surprised by the number of questions that we come back with, rather than just a yes or no. Well, how do you want it displayed? On a mannequin or a dress form or flat? Okay, what type of mannequin? How is it, there's so many different questions and variables that can be introduced, and they're all really important, and we spend a lot of time thinking about them. I also think it's just really fascinating to look back at sort of the history of mannequins and display and see how aesthetics have changed so much over time. I would say that more often than not, we want the mannequins to be sort of tabula rasa. We don't want them to necessarily have too much personality. Often we use mannequins with more abstracted features. And to your point, in recent years especially, we've gone with gray mannequins or clear mannequins very frequently, because we don't want them to necessarily project a very strong identity or necessarily be a statement based on race. For many years, for example, mannequins were white, but I think that that's often read as Caucasian, where the intention has been to connect back to the gallery wall and this idea of a white box and something that sort of disappears. And to that point, invisible mounts, which you mentioned for shows like Masterworks or Sleeping Beauties, are some of our favorite ways to display dress, because essentially they're made by dressing the garment on a form and then cutting away all of the form. And it's actually a really incredibly involved and time-consuming process. Sometimes the pieces have to be dressed a couple times, and the mannequins are really carefully marked. We do really horrible things to them in order to properly support the garments. We carve out ribs. We fill them with ethafoam. If you see what's underneath, it can be terrifying. But we want to support the garment, and we want to make sure that we're not putting undue strain or stress on the garment itself. We want to make sure that it can withstand a long period of vertical display, which is kind of technical, but really important. And
Yeah, I
we
can
want it to
imagine.
look good and to look the way that it was like designed and to sort of fulfill the designer's vision for when the piece was first created. And for our invisible mounts, we even go a step further. Like our colleagues will choose textiles that match the garment itself and line the interior of the form. So if you see anything, it looks perfect and you have no idea that there's actually a form there. So there's a lot of thought and care that goes into that work. But sometimes we do want to have like representation of a person or figure, and that happens too. And I'm thinking of this wasn't our show, but the incredible Frida Kahlo exhibition. I don't know if you saw
I
that
didn't see
one.
it. Yeah.
But they 3D printed mannequin heads based on Kahlo's likeness, and they were showing her garments. So it was very personal and
That's weird.
specific. It's a little. I mean, it can be a little eerie or creepy, but I think it also was an important way to like pay homage to the
Yeah.
wearer and to like really bring her identity into that. And to that point, recently, I worked on a show in 2023 called Women Dressing Women, and we had this really incredible ensemble which came into the collection that was created by this designer, Hilary Taymor, for the label Kalina Strada, and it was worn on the runway by a model, Ariana Rose Phillip. Ariana has cerebral palsy and she uses a power chair. And Hilary had created this really lovely chain that was sort of like a bracelet jewelry, and it also like draped around the chair. And this
I
really,
saw a picture of that. Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was this really beautiful gesture that embraced the chair as an extension of the wearer. And I really wanted to include these wild sneakers that she made that matched this floral printed bodysuit that Ariana wore. And the sneakers had essentially like cozies around them with these little ruffles and things. And then she had this chain. And it was a great ensemble. And I also really loved the fact that she was dressing Ariana in a way that was really like exuberant and playful and expressive. Because often when you look at like accessible fashion, it's all about camouflage and sort of blending in. So we shot it for the book without the chain, but I felt like it was like really missing something, and it was on a seated mannequin. So I was talking to Andrew about it, and I was like, I feel like we're missing part of the story. I really want to include this wheelchair chain. And he's like, well, why don't you make a mannequin? So we flew to Nice with Ariana and her manager and her father, and we created a custom mannequin that she modeled for. And it was actually like a moment that I'm really proud of. It was the first time we presented disability in our galleries, really conveyed this idea that fashion is for everyone. And I think that's a good example of the types of moments where you might choose to actually represent a semi-real body. But to that point, we did slightly abstract like her face a little bit, so it was harmonious with the other mannequins in the gallery. It was a gray mannequin, but it had a strong enough likeness that you knew it was her.
I would think mannequins are in some ways that you're an easy way into narrative in a show with fashion, and so it's like you're depending on the color and if it has a face or not, or if it remains headless, and you're showing something that's meant to be on a body, but you're also negating the body in a certain sense with a mannequin. So it must be like an interesting tightrope to walk.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a balancing act of sorts.
And what about, because fashion's so famous for thin people and with cliches, it's like, what about like bigger bodies? Do you ever like think about representing a wider diversity of body types in a show?
Yeah, that's actually been a really regular topic of conversation. And we do. One of the tricky things, to go back to what I was talking about before, is that we always need to support the garment and make sure we're not putting stress on it,
Right.
etc. So whatever size the garment is, the mannequin needs to fit that size. So unless an object comes into the collection that's a larger size,
Right.
then it has to go on a proportionate mannequin. And especially for contemporary fashion, with earlier fashion, 18th, 19th, early 20th century, those pieces are really connected to the wearer and often the donor. But with contemporary fashion, we are often collecting runway samples, which tend to be quite small.
Does the Met have, like, we have stock frames that we use do you have stock mannequins? Or do you get them? Do you rent them somewhere, or do you have them custom made? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. We have some stock, We also often collaborate with artists to make new ones. We'll customize our mannequins. We'll send things out to be painted, to have a novel head created. The most recent show, Superfine, was actually a collaboration with Tonda Francis, the artist Tonda Francis, to create a unique mannequin for that show. So it varies. Every project gets a different approach.
So did that artist make a mannequin model that was kind of roughly copied for the rest of everything in the show? Was it like?
Yeah, they worked really closely with our installation manager, Joyce Wong, who's amazing. And
That show looked amazing. It really did.
Yeah, I loved that show.
Yeah.
And I didn't work on it, so I got to enjoy it as like a visitor myself.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
But
you told me you stayed out of it because you wanted to save the surprise for the end. You didn't want to see the guts of it being put up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I waited as long as I possibly could, and then went to see the gallery spaces. But Joyce works really closely with mannequin manufacturers and artists and sort of liaises, and make sure that we have the curatorial vision and like the creative direction of the show being considered. She also knows how to speak mannequin, so she's really great at like talking to the factories. I mean, there's things that you wouldn't think about. So for example, you need to have space underneath the arm for dressing, because the last thing you want to do with a priceless, very fragile garment is get it stuck in the arm when you're removing the arm. So we call it a dressing gap.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Can you say a few words in mannequin?
I think I just did.
So this is a question about costume terminology, costume versus fashion. The department you work in at the Met is called the Costume Institute, which is obviously deeply associated with fashion and its history. Why is it called the Costume Institute and not something else? And what I'm getting at is the terms costume versus fashion. What is the difference, and what are the nuances of using these two terms in your field?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's from Rosario. I give her, she's here. Yeah.
Good job, Rosario. That comes up quite a bit. And I think, the short answer is that costume is a more general, inclusive term that can discuss dress from any time period, any culture, any element of dress, garments, accessories, etc. Hairstyle.
So it doesn't mean the costume in a theatrical sense. It just means this could be
Exactly.
my costume for today. Yeah.
Exactly. But fashion, we speak of fashion with a big F, a capital F, and a little f as well. And a capital F is reference to the larger fashion industry, to the professional organizations. The smaller f is really just a notion of like an expression of like trends, dress, customs at any given time.
Thank you. So this is a question about fashion in art history. As an art historian, one of the first times I realized how fashion and art history related was in graduate school, when one of my professors explained that she was able to redate a Cézanne painting by analyzing what the female sitter was wearing. One point she made was that fashion changes so rapidly and thus has a granularity reflected in the wide culture that's shared by few other mediums. That was her point. By that logic, styles of painting and sculpture, for example, changed less rapidly than styles of clothes, and I would agree with that from what I know of the history of art, Western art at least. What are your thoughts on that, and do you think that's generally accepted as true, that fashion has a granularity that's not present in other things?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you share that anecdote, because I have to say, the first art history class I ever took, I was taking concurrently as an undergraduate student with my first costume history class, and as I was sort of wrapping my head around how to study this incredible group of paintings that covered a really wide time period and not only like memorize all this information, but also like synthesize it, I realized that I was able to date the paintings so much easier that had dress in them. And also that was more portraiture based as opposed to like genre painting or religious painting, etc. So it is a very true thing and an incredibly helpful tool when it comes to working with art and understanding art, dating art, etc. But I would agree with you. I do think that fashion moves much quicker. It's viewed as a sort of ephemeral medium in a lot of ways. We are wearing our clothes out all the time.
Mhm.
We're changing them based on season and weather and climate. It's a really quick and sort of responsive medium, generally speaking. And garments just don't last as long typically as a lot of art objects. So I think all of those things combine towards it sort of relentless forward motion that we associate with fashion today.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's the advantage of studying that medium because you can date paintings. Like, I bet it happens regularly that people can change the way they think of an art object based on analyzing the garments.
Yeah,
Do you get colleagues in other departments ask, like in European painting and sculpture, saying,
Mhm.
"Can you help me figure this painting out?" Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always, I mean, that's one of the amazing things about being at a place like the Met. We have
Yeah, right.
colleagues in so many different areas of expertise, and we're constantly sort of tapping each other
Yeah.
for help or feedback on something.
Yeah, great. So this is sort of a related question. You helped me with your expertise back in 2012 when I was researching Edward Hopper, who did a series of quick drawings showing fashionably dressed Parisians during one of his stays in Paris. Your comments not only gave me a language to describe the clothes correctly, but they also helped me understand how accurately Hopper's drawings reflected contemporary fashion and thus supported a thesis of the show that direct, detailed, and accurate observation of real life through drawing was crucial to the artist. Any interesting cases you know of in which you sort of talked about this, but in which fashion helps us understand art, especially as it relates to the history of painting and sculpture? And I assume that when you walk through the Met's painting collection, you probably can't stop looking at all the clothes.
Well, I have to say, I really love portraiture and photography and old family photos, 100%. I would say, it's interesting. There is a painting in not in our collection, there's a dress in our collection that I was researching for an exhibition that we organized in 2015 called Death Becomes Her, A Century of Mourning Attire.
Mhm.
And it's a really incredible dress from the 1820s. It has these like puff sleeves that were in fashion during the time. It's black because it's mourning. It's a really slim silhouette. It's in beautiful condition, this like sort of ethereal chiffon. And I was looking into the piece and looking at the credit line. And it was donated by Lily Elizabeth, the wife of the artist Francis Davis Millet. And this is sort of a reverse example of drawing information from painting and instead using the fashion object to like open up, the door to looking at fine art in a different manner. But I started looking and I came across a painting which had been sold at auction in about 2008. That's in a private collection now, and it featured the model wearing this dress, who incidentally was his wife. And it was especially fascinating because it was one of the few pieces that came to the collection before the Costume Institute existed as a curatorial department. And that had initially like really caught my eye and is what pushed me to sort of delve into the provenance of the piece. But interestingly enough, and sort of in a sad premonition, the piece was donated by Lily to the Met in 1913, which was the year after the artist had died. He was actually one of the Titanic victims.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But it came with a group of about 26 other garments, which had all been part of his essentially his studio wardrobe. And I thought it was just a really great example of an artist taking an object like a mourning dress that clearly has so much symbolism and meaning and using it so intentionally in painting and sort of really recognizing the rich narrative potential that clothing has and what it can teach us. And that sort of led me down a rabbit hole. And I learned that he actually was a specialist in Greek and Roman costume and would give lectures and was clearly like really invested in learning more about these objects and things. So that was sort of an interesting example of garments sort of opening my mind to thinking about painting or how artists might be thinking about the garments that they're depicting and painting in a slightly different way. And also how some objects survive sometimes through methods that we may not think of.
Right. Is there a case where a painting in the Met, you have the actual garment that is in the painting? Do you know of any?
That's a great question. I'm sure there must be.
Yeah, I was thinking, or at least the type, or something close to the type.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head if I know of one. I don't, but we do have some really like famous garments in the collection. For example, we have the Duchess of Windsor's wedding dress,
Okay.
which is actually a really fascinating piece. It was designed for her by Mambachet, and it was this shade of blue that the designer called Wallace Blue after her eyes. And today it's sadly like the color that we would call grayish goods, or sort of natural fibers. It's faded into this pale tan brown color, and is an example of fugitive dyes. And she donated it to the Met in 1950, so just, a little over a dozen years after the wedding. But sadly, despite all we could do to care for it and preserve it, it's faded. The dyes were fugitive, but it's still an amazing piece, and it's very striking and a well-known object.
Art ages. I've come to accept it.
It really
Yeah.
does, especially
Rauschenberg
fashion.
Combine does not look like what it was when he painted it, but yeah, it's definitely a thing. I imagine it's a real thing in your field, that the color fading and fugitive fabrics.
Absolutely.
And it's obviously you have to restrict display based on light exposure, I would imagine, like you do with works on paper.
Absolutely. Yeah, fashion is very susceptible to damage from light. It's really sensitive to temperature fluctuations, to relative humidity. So we have to put a lot of thought into how we're displaying it and what the conditions are like.
Do you ever do like specialized tours of shows that just focus on the fashion? I'm thinking of like Sargent in Paris, which was an amazing show, which I would have think you could have a field day with something like that. But
yeah, we haven't done any touring shows focused on fashion just yet. We have occasionally had a show that has gone to other venues. It's been a while, but when the Brooklyn Museum Costume Collection came to the Met in 2009, a show called High Style was organized, and a really amazing catalog that my colleague Jan Reeder put together. And then that show toured and went to two different venues. But it's been a while since we've toured a show. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And we talked about mannequins a little bit, so you
Yeah.
have some sense of the work that goes into dressing things. But I should mention too, we never just like put anything on the form. So whenever we travel costume, a Costume Institute staff member always has to go as a courier. And often we're, covering the mannequins with barrier materials, sewing padding and things onto the form. And it can take quite a while to like prepare the form before you put the garment on it. So it's a lot of work.
I've watched that when we did a show called Painted Cloth, where we borrowed two 18th century, I believe, costumes from LA County Museum. This is a show about Spanish colonial painting and costume and textiles. And they took days to get this. I mean, it was really interesting to watch them, the long process it took from unpacking the thing and laying it flat to dealing with whatever they deal with, I don't know, and then getting it on the form. And I could see why you need someone specialized to do that, because our team don't has the knowledge to do that. So
yeah, sometimes when lenders are asking to borrow pieces, they're shocked because we typically like allocate like a day per garment, maybe condense it a little bit, where you can sort of hang like a dozen paintings in a day with a bunch of skillful
flat art is
handlers.
easy. Flat art's very easy. Okay, this is a question about fashion and commerce. So we are living in a moment when major auction houses are selling Hermes, Kelly, and Birkin bags at auction, fetching huge prices that in some cases rival that of fine art. So you have outlets for fine art sales that are also now outlets for selling fashion items. The Costume Institute's most prominent patron, Anna Wintour, is also obviously deeply involved with the commercial side of fashion through her work at Vogue. Yet the Met is the Met, a deeply scholarly, not-for-profit museum. And I just wondered, how is the intertwining of the commercial fashion world and the Costume Institute navigated, or indeed any museum that collects that material?
Yeah. Well, I think despite how different the Costume Institute is from other curatorial departments in a lot of ways, this is one area where we're probably more typical. We do have a clear divide, again, when it comes to things like curatorial autonomy, et cetera. And we operate very separately from the contemporary fashion industry.
Is it hard to maintain that boundary sometimes, or is it?
I don't think so. I mean, of course, we're working with fashion houses on loans and acquisitions and interacting with the industry all the time. But one thing that is, I think, really important about the Costume Institute is when the institution and the department was first founded, it was created with the intention to be a scholarly resource for the contemporary fashion industry, for scholars, art historians, academics, designers, and even costume designers. We sometimes work with costume designers and actors. We had Daniel Day-Lewis came actually when he was working on Phantom Thread, which is sort of loosely based around the semi-eccentric Anglo-American designer Charles James.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
and he wanted,
that makes sense. Yeah.
he's a real sort of method actor, so he wanted to see the garments and see those pieces and look at them up close. So that we do take research appointments. We invite scholars into our libraries. So that part of our work is really important, and there is a lot of sort of discourse in that sense. But when it comes to like our shows, the topics, how they're executed, how they're represented, how they're messaged, that's 100%, within the museum.
It's important. It's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Here I'm starting with a quote from Karl Lagerfeld. Karl Lagerfeld exclaimed, "Fashion does not belong in the museum; it belongs in the street." And he said this as the museum was preparing for the 2005 Chanel exhibition. What are some of the recommendations or insights for working with contemporary designers and fashion houses to translate the needs of a curatorial vision and public exhibition while respecting the way fashion is primarily consumed and presented in person? So what's on the street versus what's in the museum?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we touched upon this a little bit.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
But I would say that, like, to us, it's really important that as much as we're maintaining some scholarly distance, that we're also being accurate and that we're also representing these objects the way that they were intended to be shown. So, for example, if we're showing a work by a fashion designer, we would never like style an ensemble together and like mix and match pieces or dress things across decades just for like aesthetic effect or display. We always are looking at what the designer's original intentions were and how the object was made to be presented, and that actually comes into play when it comes to things like conservation as well. So even pieces from like an earlier time, we've had like maybe like an 18th century garment where it might be missing like a lapel or a big piece, and we make the decision then to conserve or treat the piece. And we've done interesting things where we've like 3D printed 18th century woven textiles, etc.
It's very smart.
Yeah, and there's so much you can do like with innovation, etc. But we always want the object to not only look its best, but also look the way that it should have looked. Unless, of course, the curatorial thesis or the method of display is about sort of unpacking that wear and damage and condition of the object, which is an interesting interpretive approach too, but doesn't always fit so neatly into every show.
There was a figure in Superfine. I can't remember his name, but I think he had a shop in Harlem, and he would appropriate other designers' garments.
Dapper Dan.
Yeah, and so that was an example of like, I mean, he was not in the traditional fashion world. He was like maybe the equivalent of a graffiti artist or something, but nonetheless, brilliant. And so that seems like an interesting case.
Absolutely. We actually had a talk with him at the museum recently, and he's extraordinary. He's lived such an interesting life and is actually incredibly thoughtful about his approach to fashion. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that really stood out for me in that show. I was fascinated by it. So a question about fashion and connoisseurship. We've talked a little bit about this, or maybe a lot. In order to fully understand most art objects, close looking, handling, and touch are crucial. Don't touch things in museums, but if you work there, you have to. This is certainly true for painting and sculpture and works on paper, which may surprise people, but it's true. And most art mediums, though obviously constant handling is to be avoided in order to preserve things. Nowadays, the V&A in London has a new building featuring open storage in which anyone can schedule an appointment to access their comprehensive fashion collection and study historical stitches, materials, patterns, etc. Can you speak a bit about what the handling and close examination of costumes and garments can teach you about them and the cultures that produce them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you 100%. Nothing will ever replace like being able to work with and encounter an object in person. And that's actually one of my favorite parts about the job, when you've been looking at something on a screen for so long or in printed form, and then you actually see the object in person. I think that's especially important with fashion, which can be so nuanced and detailed. And by looking at a garment, you get a better sense of
Complicated objects. I mean, just
yeah,
everything.
absolutely. Like the weave,
Yeah.
the way the garment's constructed, looking at the inside and the seams is always really fascinating and can tell you a lot about the choices, good or bad, that the designer may have made or the seamstress that worked on it. I also think the sort of material analysis perspective of things is really fascinating. And, we did a show in 2016 called Manus Ex Machina, Fashion in
Yeah.
an Age of
Great show.
Technology,
Yeah.
which was one of my favorite shows that we worked on. And for all of our labels, we did something a little unusual where we broke down every single object based on what elements were machine executed and what elements were executed by hand. And we look at those things to a degree anyway, but for me, it was such a fascinating project to work on because you're really looking at things. And it was so interesting to see, especially the way that contemporary designers are working. And despite how technically advanced or like sort of novel seeming the technology they're using might be, for example, we have pieces by like Iris van Herpen that were 3D printed, or it was poured silicone that's been laser cut. There would still be a mix of like hand sewing and like hand manipulation and things that would occur. And to sort of really sort of get into that headspace and think about the makers behind the object and how it was put together and those creative decisions and the innovation that may have occurred, I think is really fascinating. And then, of course, too, garments really bear traces of the body.
Mhm.
So you can see a lot and sort of deduce a lot about if something's been really worn, really loved, has it been mended? Does it have a conservation history? And those aspects of the object's life are also really fascinating to consider too, and I think can provide opportunity for elaboration. And my colleagues organized a show more recently called Sleeping Beauties, Reawakening Fashion, and worked with a variety of different creative consultants and our colleagues in conservation to really analyze those objects in unusual ways to try to bring a little bit of that experience of physically engaging with objects to our museum visitors by doing things like analyzing and drawing out the scent molecules of a piece. There were like scented stations where you could like,
It's fascinating.
yeah, or looking at the, analyzing the dyes, which can tell you about where a piece might have been made, what it was dyed with, when it was created. There's just so many layers of information that can be extracted from the material object itself. So that's always really fascinating.
We try to put out, if we think something's going to look very touchable with people, we try to put out samples of the material, and we work
Oh, yeah.
because it really helps, because people they're very curious, and especially with things like clothes, which they're used to touching. We've worked with artists to get samples so that they can, have a safe feel of what the material is like, because it is really important.
Absolutely.
I assume, I know the Met has a deep conservation department in every area, and then I assume you must work closely with conservators in
Yeah.
your department.
We have our own conservation team, which is incredible and really important because textiles have very different conservation needs than garments, which go on vertical display. And as we were discussing, there's often unusual materials that come
Yeah.
into contemporary fashion
Especially
too.
now,
So
yeah.
so more
Right.
than ever, we have to really be on top of those things and have the expertise to handle those materials properly.
I'm going to ask one more question myself, and then we're going to start the audience questions. But this is good place to end, I think, about drawing and designing. The croquis drawing is an indelible part of costume studies. In your curatorial approach, what are some methods for incorporating these works into final exhibition displays to recognize their foundational role in a garment's final creation? And then, does the Costume Institute collect drawings?
Well, in answer to the latter part of your question, we do. We have a Department of Drawings and Prints,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of sort of overlap.
Major
objects.
important department, yeah.
Yeah. But we might have things from artists like Marcel Vertès or Jean Cocteau, et cetera, who
Right.
worked with fashion designers that are in drawings and prints or pochoir prints, et cetera, that are accessioned in another department. However, we have an incredible library, and we're always collecting rare materials for our library special collections, which are unaccessioned, which include drawings. And we've had some really exciting acquisitions in recent years. Some amazing albums of 1920s fashion drawings, some Balenciaga sketches. And I think what's exciting about the Balenciaga sketches is something that's exciting about the way that drawing works within fashion, and it's that it operates on so many different levels. So you have like the croquis and designers who might take the fashion illustration track, and drawing might be their primary mode of working or communication to collaborate with their teams. And I don't know if you saw the Karl Lagerfeld exhibition.
I missed it, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, it was centered around his practice and his method of drawing as a starting point. And
I knew he drew a lot. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he was a prolific drawer, and we had some amazing footage that the filmmaker Loic Prigent had captured of him drawing, and it's just mesmerizing. He was so quick and amazing, and we started and ended the exhibition with him drawing. But not only do you have the designer creating illustrations, but then there's like technical flats.
Sure.
And then earlier in fashion history, before photography was like so ubiquitous, illustration was so critical to like sharing and disseminating styles. And not only did you have the designers, but you had specialized artisans that were just creating albums and sketches and paintings to send out to clientele internationally, to share in the studio, etc. So it's always amazing to come across those documents and to add them to our special collections. And some of them are just so beautifully executed and really outstanding, like artworks in their own. And I think speaks to the collective nature of design too, and the many, many hands that are involved in producing fashion.
Do the big fashion houses tend to keep deep archives of drawings and things like that? All the stuff that's made by their makers?
More and more so, but I would say even some of like the older, what we might call heritage houses in France, like Chanel and Dior, that have been really actively creating incredibly professional archives, are still always searching for information from like early years. It's very rare that things have been kept and held intact for so long. But yeah, it's interesting to see the way that younger designers are thinking about that more and sort of creating archives in real time and recognizing the value of these materials for the future.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we're going to turn it over to the public, our beautiful public. I'm going to repeat the question. So we have a web audience, so I can repeat it for them. So speak up, please. And please just ask a question, don't make a comment. And you're going to go first, right?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Manning. I'm the manager of public programs here. What did you all think? Can we give them a round of applause real fast? That was so lovely. I want to give an extra special thanks to our live stream audience and to our members. You are what make these programs possible here at the Blanton, so thank you so much. I also want to tell you that a portion of your ticket today can go towards a membership. So after you leave today, you can head to our check-in space and they can help you with that. Coming up, you can use that membership to get in free to our Blanton All Day program. You can see here, we're going to have Grammy-winning choir conspirare here, so please come out, bring your family. Now to a few housekeeping things. As Carter said, our conversation is going to be about 15 minutes. So what we want to do is stick to questions, refrain from comments if you can, and then we want to have mics passed down to you. What you'll do is you'll hold the mic close to your face as you can so we can hear and our live stream audience can hear. Then you'll pass the mic back down to our assistants here in the aisle. And then lastly, after the Q&A is over, please exit at the top. So enjoy. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you were first with your hand, so we'll pick you first.
I'm a Kubo fan and Comme des Garçons, and I'm curious how you decided on Comme des Garçons, the whole issue of Japanese influence on fashion, and when you did the show about China and Chinese influence, like how do you decide why Comme des Garçons?
So the question is, how do you determine the exhibition program, basically, and which designers to showcase or not?
Absolutely. Well, for the record, I'm wearing Comme des Garçons right now, which I thought you needed to know. All of our topics are chosen based on things that we feel will be relevant Rei Kawakubo, the Japanese designer behind Comme des Garçons, has been incredibly revolutionary and influential. And that was a show that was curated by Andrew Bolton, our head curator. And he just felt that it really strongly that like she merited a monographic show. When we're creating our programming, we tried to have a nice mix between monographic shows, thematic shows, working across time periods, so we're not always showing the same types of narratives regularly, and we tried to sort of mix it up a little bit. The other show that you mentioned, China Through the Looking Glass, was an exhibition that was a collaboration with our colleagues in the Department of Asian Art in 2015. And that show was, I think it was a show that Andrew had wanted to work on for quite some time. And he had actually, before he came to the Met, been a curator in the Asian art department at the Victor and Albert Museum. So I think he had a particular affinity and soft spot, of course, for Asian art and incredible knowledge about it as well. But I think in a lot of ways, the show sort of served as an example of just cross-cultural exchange and the way that designers and creatives have always looked around the world for inspiration. And we worked with the director, Wong Kar-wai, on the show, who was a creative consultant for it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was amazing.
Yeah,
and I
that's
feel like
amazing.
we learned so much from him too. But one of the things that I think was really interesting that came out of that show is that not only were we looking at how designers working within the Western fashion system were like drawing information and inspiration from China, including many who had never been to China before. So it was sort of this like imaginary evocation of China that they were looking to, but simultaneously looking at, in part through Wong Kar-wai's input and suggestions, how like Chinese filmmakers and American filmmakers have created this conception of China as well, and looking at some elements of Occidentalism as well, how Chinese designers and artists have also looked at Western culture and brought that into their work too. So it was really about like cross-cultural exchange and interdisciplinarity and sort of being in dialogue with the larger institution. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes, you there. Can you wait for the mic? Thank you.
Hi, does the Costume Institute ever have to deal with issues of provenance like a more traditional art museum has to?
The question's about provenance and how you track the history of a garment.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the Met, like many other institutions, has really sort of stepped up its provenance research in recent years. We are always documenting where things came from and doing our best and our due diligence to understand the source of things. And part of that is to conform to like ethical standards. But to my point earlier about my story, like looking at a garment in our collection and realizing that it came from an artist's archive and like what additional meaning can come from provenance, I think that it's just something that's best practice and something that is like really interesting as a researcher too, to be able to have that broader understanding of an object. So yeah, we're very interested in provenance always.
Thank you.
I'm a scientist, so I'm always trying to figure out ways to get people, little kids, into STEM. Can you discuss the intersection of art and history and science in your work?
So the question is about the intersection of art, history, and science in your fashion world. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talked about this a little bit in terms of like how we work with our conservation team, and I would just sort of underscore again how much meaning can be drawn from objects by analyzing them and looking closer at them, whether it's doing like dye analysis or fiber analysis to determine possibly where and when an object may have been made. I recently looked with one of my colleagues at two pieces together that were made by two Italian designers, Maria Menacci Galenga and Mariano Fortuny Madrazo, who are both working in a very similar sort of printmaking manner. And we looked at the objects together under a microscope. And there's some research that has been done and some assumptions about how their printing techniques were similar and different. But this is getting really specific.
Okay.
But looking at the Fortuny, for example, we could see that the metal flakes that were used on these Fortuny pigments were like really crushed, where the Galenga flakes were like much wholer pieces and sort of laying on top of the fabric and the binder that had been used. And that sort of, to me, confirmed what I'd been reading about the way that she worked, which was using these wooden blocks to place adhesive. They were essentially stencils onto garments and then brushing these loose metallic powder pigments over the adhesive, which actually also explains this really delicate, beautiful ombre that she would create with these metallic effects. So
Conservation science is super important to
Absolutely.
what we all do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna look for someone high up there. The woman up there, I believe, are wearing what? Yes. Yes, you. Sorry, it's hard to say. Like.
Hi, my name is Sheila. I'm a graduate student in the history department here, and I'm working on dresses and textiles and identity formation. So my question is actually on a very personal level. I wanted to know, as a curator who works on fashion exhibitions, I wanted to know what does a deeply fulfilling day looks like for you working on dresses? And also, I mean, what does a not so fulfilling day looks like?
So the question is about how you, what drives you about your love of fashion, I think, sort of. That's the gist. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that question. I have to say that I think people imagine being a curator at the Costume Institute to be incredibly glamorous. And the reality is I spend a lot of time looking at books and on the computer and going through the database. But with that said, there is so much creative collaboration that occurs, and I really just revel in those moments and the expertise and the knowledge that the colleagues and creative collaborators that we work with are able to provide. So from anything from like looking at an object with a colleague under a microscope, I mean, that's pretty amazing to be able to do that, to have that access to objects like that, to meeting with colleagues, to traveling and installing art in exhibitions that we're lending to visiting archives and fashion houses and being able to speak with designers and hear about their work, or having a design meeting with a creative collaborator. It's a great pleasure and privilege to work with such a wide variety of specialists. And I would also say, I feel like I learned so much too, even from the jobs that we don't think about when it comes to like curating exhibitions or working on shows or fashion. I learned things from like our buildings team, and in terms of thinking about the safety of objects or how things need to be like displayed. Everyone has something to contribute, and it's just amazing to be able to like learn from so many people constantly.
The Met has about the deepest bench of any museum in the world. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary, the Met. It's like just from on every level. So yeah, it's a great place. And no one's asked about the gala. I can't believe it. Yes, up there with the white shirt, raising your hand.
Hi, I had a question with regards to acquisitions and international databases, how you find out who has what around the world when you need things, and also who are the people that are going out that know that someone has a closet or someone is a collector, and are they dealt with in the same way that art is paintings and sculpture and that is dealt with, in the sense of getting their collections donated?
Yeah. Did you want to?
No. Oh, sorry. Just to repeat it. I'm so fascinated by your question. The question is about how you deal with acquisitions. People that collect fashion obviously might wear it different than collecting painting and sculpture. How is that handled at the Met? It's a good question.
Yeah. So I think that we probably operate very similarly to the way that other art forms are collected when it comes to working with colleagues and curators, et cetera, collectors. We do a lot of research to track down objects. We might reach out to another institution. We might reach out to the fashion house or to makers through extended networks if we're searching for a piece. We also get a lot of inquiries from other scholars and researchers and the general public, including people who are very kindly offering donations to the permanent collection. So that's how a lot of those connections are fostered and made, essentially. And I would also say that a lot of fashion is sold at auction now. It's become a really popular area, as you mentioned earlier,
yeah.
Carter. So yeah, we're really just constantly keeping our eyes and ears open and looking for pieces that will complement the permanent collection and grow it.
Do you ever buy stuff off the rack? Because I know someone in LA when I worked at LACMA that she would go to this discount place where I went and buy stuff sometimes.
Yeah,
I mean, discount fashion, not like discount.
Yeah, our acquisitions policies are a little trickier, so we have to be really careful about
Imagine.
where funds are coming from, and there's a lot of paperwork involved that makes sort of shopping impulsively off the rack a little trickier. That's not to say it doesn't happen sometimes. But we do, sometimes I'll even buy something and donate it, or, Andrew's often buying and donating things.
Yeah, that's
and
interesting.
yeah.
Wow.
Or we'll reach out to the design house directly if we want something in a current season. So we're buying from them.
Do you buy it from
directly.
them? Are they happy to give it, or do you buy it?
It's a mix.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a younger design house, we really try to make sure
Support
that we're
them.
supporting them. If it's a very large house that we've collected from a lot, then we might ask if they'd be open to a donation, which we always appreciate, or buy, depending.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more audience question. Yes, ma'am. You're perfectly
Hi.
lined up.
The question is about the collection or the art show you have about Frida Kahlo. And through the process, what did you learn about not only the dresses that she had and where they came from, and did you learn something more about her?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to say, I can't entirely answer it because I didn't work on that show. But I thought it was a remarkable exhibition. And I thought the way that they intermingled her artworks, the clothes and garments that she owned, personal objects that she wore, like body casts and things, really gave a very full, vivid picture of the artist and maker and a life lived. And there's an extraordinary catalog for that show, which traveled. So I thought it was a really important exhibition.
I think that's all. Our time is up. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for coming. Okay.